where I'm at on this now. I got that piece of metal out of that rocker, and the rocker pumps oil. But I think that lifter is bad because it still has a miss on that cylinder, but it's this intermittent thing, and it's the same like when you go down the road. I took it over to my brother's yesterday. I put about 10 miles on it. I took it over there because I had to have him help me bleed the brakes. You need somebody to push on the pedal and then open the bleeder valve. Because I had one good brake, you know, but now I've got all good brakes. But, looking at it, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm pretty sure that lifter's bad, the one where the mystery piece of metal ended up in the rocker. So I'm going to order in a set of lifters. You know, Parts for this aren't bad. And my theory is, okay, to replace the lifters, I got to take, well, the valve covers off and the intake manifold off. And then the lifters are right there. You just back the rocker off and pull the lifter out. So not a big job, but it'll also give me a chance to get a look at the cam, because you can look down the bore of the lifter and see the condition the cam is in. So I don't think that's the problem because it is odd. Driving down the road, you wouldn't think there was anything wrong. You really don't hear a noise until you back off on it, and then you'll get that rattle again. So I don't think it's deeper in the motor. I think it's in that lifter. And like I say, on this, the intake manifold isn't that hard to get off. So I will do that. Well, wait till the parts come in, then I'll do that. And I got to get a gasket. Well, it's one of these deals where the full gasket set for the motor only costs us slightly more than just buying the intake gasket. So I'll go ahead and buy the full gasket set because, if I end up going deeper into the motor, it's good to have that on hand. One thing I did find out yesterday, and the gasket set isn't bad for this. The full gasket set's like $60. Intake is like 40. Well, I'll go for the full set. I'm hoping, like people have suggested it could be timing chain, and these have been known to have bad timing chains. The replacement is a heavier duty one. But in order to pull the timing chain or to get the timing cover off, you actually have to drop the oil pan. And like I say, this has got the dual I-beam front suspension. Your oil pan is right up against the frame. I mean, there's only like an inch of clearance. That isn't enough to get that pan. It's a deep pan. So you'd have to pull the motor. Well, okay, if I have to do that further down the road, but I'm not going to leap into that. It's better to wait until next summer and do it. I wish I would have started, but it never even crossed my mind to work on this until this fall. But it would be a good summer vehicle, or like 3/4 of the year, it'd be a good vehicle. So eventually I might end up pulling that motor and rebuilding the whole thing, because you can buy the whole rebuild kit for $400 and some. So it's not that big a deal. One thing I did find out yesterday, that the clutch is bad. Now, I knew the clutch was weak on this because one time me and my brother were picking up square bales with this, and we had a woman driving the pickup, and a high geared straight stick, she smoked the clutch. Well, okay, so I know the clutch was bad, but you go down the road now, if you kick her down, the clutch will slip. So I can replace the clutch. But to do it, you have to pull the tranny and the bell housing. not a big deal, but my thought is, okay, if I'm that far in, you're halfway to pulling a motor. So I don't want to do that until I make sure that this lifter situation clears up that knock. So I'll go ahead and get a clutch, but I won't put it in yet. And then we'll see how it goes. Because eventually I'll have to put a clutch in anyway, so it'll be all right to have it on hand. Clutch, pressure plate, throw out bearing, replace them all, like 150. Like I said, parts aren't expensive for this, and they aren't hard to find. Actually, like I was looking and thinking, okay, what do I have to replace the cam? Well, you can get all kinds of high performance cams, are very common, but it was hard to find a cam that was the original spec cam, more of a low end type cam. They are available though, but I have no reason really to suspect that the cam is bad. Like that little piece of metal, it makes me think, okay, there's a problem in the lifter because it almost had to come from the lifter, that piece of metal that worked up there, and that is the cylinder that it's misfiring on. So I'm thinking that is where my problem lies. But I'll get the lifters, and you get a nice day like today, I could easily pull that manifold off and get that all switched out. It's not a big problem. In the meantime, I got other stuff I'll do on it until the parts get here. So I want to check all the differential and tranny fluids, but also some wiring I have to fix. There's a problem on that connector where a mouse chewed off 3 wires. Well, at least for a standard type connector, and I can fix that. But I do have like headlights working. That's a start. And I've got a new brake light switch I can put in because the brake light switch completely fell apart when I was monkeying around with the pedal getting that master cylinder on. So a cheap plastic switch is like $6 switch, but plastic just deteriorates over time, and when I took it loose, it just disintegrated. Flew springs were flying, and they got a weird system where they run the brake light switch on the pedal. You would have thought it would be a pressure unit, but nope, they've got a regular mechanical switch, but the switch is mounted on the pedal. Well, that's easy to put in. But I got little odds and ends I can do on it until the parts get in. Then it'll be a matter of if I have a nice day. If I got a nice day, I'll quick tear that apart. Or I can bring it over to my brother's and put it in the shop there and do it quick. But right now he's working on a Ford too. He's got a '63 Ford Galaxy 500 convertible that he got cheap. And and in fact, that had bad lifters too, and bent push rods and whatnot. But he's got that almost together now. He's working on the exhaust. But there again, that's he's not used to working on Fords either. You run into Ford did things different. But I think that's my plan at the moment. Because, like I say, I don't really need this vehicle, especially now when we're coming into fall, into winter. I drive the M37 in winter. And this thing, when you're talking 2-wheel drive, light in the ass end, it's not a winter vehicle. A little dew on the grass and she spins. You'd have to run chains on it in winter. But I was able to test, heater worked, that sort of thing. So I'm pleased with that. But before I go too deep, like I say, like deep enough to do the clutch, I want to make sure I don't have to pull the motor right away, if that isn't a priority, if I can get by with the lifter, then I'll go ahead and pull the clutch out and replace it, but it isn't bad, when you got two-wheel drive and a 3-speed, it isn't bad to get the clutch out of there. But like I say, to do anything on the motor, you almost have to pull the motor out to get at the lower end at all, because you got a incredibly deep oil pan. It holds like 6 quarts, and you can see it comes right down close to the frame. So there's no getting around it. You aren't pulling that oil pan off to investigate anything. But I think the reason behind that is because they've got the dual I-beams and they run in that frame channel. But like going down the road yesterday, man, she just cruises around nice as could be. And when you're driving it, you do not hear a knock until you back off on it. Then you get that, which I swear is lifter rattle. And I have heard worse than that. But, like we were talking, this doesn't have ball joints. It's still back to where you're running kingpins. Everything real straightforward. Coils on the front, leaps on the back. So it's nice for working on, except that deep oil pan. That doesn't make it hard if you want to just poke in there. But even to get that timing cover off, you've got to take that oil pan down. And of course, if I had to pull the motor, I will replace, timing chain and all that. I mean, that's kind of a standard, because they have a reputation for that. And, like somebody was saying about a broken piston, okay, they do have a reputation for breaking the piston skirt. Because what they did was they took a 289, lengthened the stroke, which means you had to shorten the rod, so you're getting more thrust on the piston skirt. And the pistons are the same as in a 289. They didn't change that design. So they had a tendency of breaking that skirt. And then you get the piston slapping. It doesn't come apart. It just knocks on a cylinder. But I don't think that's it. I think it's that lifter. Well, like I say, I'll go ahead and put lifters in and then work from there. But I'll have the clutch on hand in case that does solve the problem. I could easily slide a clutch in. But that lifter is suspicious, particularly since it had that little piece of metal, and the only place I think that piece of metal could come from was inside the lifter. That seems the greatest likelihood to me. And since they're not expensive and they're not hard to change, I'll get them ordered. Nice driving, though. I'd have to say it does cruise down the road nice. So that's a story. It'll take a while, like maybe a week. We get a nice bit of weather, then I'll quick do that lifter change and see if that modifies anything. But she's a cruiser. And it is funny because you go down the road and you don't hear that clattering or anything, because I think at that speed you're building up more oil pressure and the lifter is sort of functioning. But then when you slow it down or back off on it, then you hear oil pressure drops, then you get a clatter from that lifter. That's my suspicion anyway. I'm going into it in stages because, like I say, I can live without it. I have lived without it for 20-some years. So, not in a big hurry. And like I say, I don't really want to pull that motor until I'm really ready to go at it. And now is really not the time of year. Fall is my busy time of year where I'm cutting the wood and whatnot. So I don't really need to spend too much time working on the vehicle that I really wouldn't drive until next year anyway. But at least I kind of know where I'm at now. And I do know that clutch is bad. But I just remember that when we were picking up hay bales and that woman was driving, poof, you could smell a burning clutch. You know, people aren't used to a straight stick in the first place. You know, most people now can't really drive a straight stick. And then, like I say, this thing is geared high, which is a good road pickup. And comfortable driving, and power steering is nice. And now I got all the brakes working. So we're part way there. At least I kind of know where I stand now, but the true test will be if that lifter, if I replace those lifters and that brings it out of it, but at least it is pumping oil up to that rocker now. But I think the problem is that it just collapses. You know, it won't. Though it appears, well, sometimes it opens a valve. You know, when I was watching it, it looked like it was opening a valve, but maybe not all the way and not all the time. It was interesting in the comments, a lot of people mentioned flywheel, a loose flywheel. Now, I've never actually had that happen on an engine, a flywheel come loose. And it really sounds like a lifter noise to me. But if I have to go into the clutch, then I'll be able to take a look at the flywheel too. Because you can get replacement flywheels for them. But there again, the trick is, you know, to find the stock equivalent. You know, everything now, you find a lot of parts for these that are high performance parts. And I ain't looking for performance, I'm just looking for operational ability. But charging system works. Like I say, I got headlights. A little iffy on the tail lights, but I think that's what the most chewed off. And in fact, I got the generator over here, so I can work on that today. So like I say, fall is my busy time of year. And I got some more maintaining to do. And there's always wood to be cut. So this is kind of on the back burner. But when I feel like working on something, I can work on this. But it is not a priority. So I am glad just to get it, you know, mobile again so I can move it around and start working on the little things. Which he'll go. Oh, in fact, right on the dash there lays the original owner's manual and the replacement brake light switch that I'll put in so I don't lose it. But my brother too, when he saw this, he hadn't seen it for years, you know, and you think, you know, really, I mean, they were making a decent pickup back then. If you made a pickup like this now, you know, simple, plain Jane, you could sell 1 million of them. Pretty straightforward.